My name is Naomi Vance. I'm 33 years old. I had worked as an interpreter for the Department of State for 8 years. 7 languages. My husband still thought I was a clerk who tracked shipping orders at a small import-export company. That evening, he took a client to dinner and asked me to come pour the wine. Partway through the meal, the client leaned toward my husband and said, in Russian, "Your wife is well behaved. Not hard to please, like that little tyrant you keep at home." My husband smiled and nodded. He answered, also in Russian, "True. I'll have to go home later and soothe that little ancestor too." I turned to the client and asked, in Russian, "The red you ordered, how long would you like it to breathe?" Both of them froze. I wiped my hands. I smiled at my husband. "I forgot to mention," I said. "The first language I ever learned was Russian." He didn't answer. He only looked at me, the way you look at a lock you thought was closed, trying to work out how much I had already heard. Neither of us said the word that had just changed everything. There was a scarf on the back of my chair that wasn't mine, and a glass of juice half finished at the place I was told to take. Someone had been sitting there before me. That was the night I started counting the things my husband had never once bothered to ask. His name is Adrian Hale, and when I met him 6 years ago, he was the only person in a loud room who spoke quietly. I liked that. I had spent my working life in a glass booth where the whole art is to disappear, to carry another person's meaning across a language without leaving a single fingerprint of your own on it. A man who did not need to be the loudest thing in the room felt, to me, like rest. We married 4 years ago. He was rising then at his family's company, Hale Global, a trading house his grandfather built, and his father guarded like a country with a border. I was 2 years into a posting I was not permitted to describe in detail, the kind that comes with a classified security clearance and a stack of paperwork about what you may and may not say at your own dinner table. Early on, I told him the true shape of it, that I traveled, that the work was sensitive, that I couldn't always say where I was going or who was in the room when I got there. He heard times, small company, boring errands. He decided that was easier, and I let him keep it, because in those first years, his tenderness came so easily that correcting him felt like breaking something that didn't need to be broken. I want to be fair to the man I married, because the story doesn't work if you think he was a monster from the start. He wasn't. He was a man who had been raised to believe the world arranged itself around his convenience, and that the people who loved him were part of the arrangement. That is a quieter thing than cruelty, and it takes longer to see, and by the time you see it clearly, you have usually already built a life on top of it. For our first anniversary, I gave him a pin. A small leaf, worked in silver, light enough to forget you were wearing it. I had it engraved on the back, in letters too small to read across a room. A leaf that leaves the branch can still reach where it wants to go. I chose those words because that was how I thought of myself back then, a person who had come from very little and gotten, on her own, somewhere far. I thought I was telling him something true about me. I found out later he had never turned it over to read the back. He wore it to 2 dinners, and then it lived in a drawer, and I told myself that a man can love the gift without studying the engraving. I told myself a lot of things in those years. Most of them were translations of something harder into something I could live beside. At the restaurant, after the client left, Adrian took my wrist. Not hard. Just enough that I understood it was a question with a grip on it. "When did you learn Russian?" "In school," I said. "It comes up in the work sometimes. A shipping clerk needs Russian." I took my wrist back and set the decanter down. "Who is the little ancestor you have to go home and soothe?" He didn't answer that. His phone lit up on the tablecloth, face up. A name I would come to know very well. Sloane. She came in a minute later as if she'd been waiting for a cue beige dress, easy smile, a man's watch loose on her wrist. She picked the scarf up off the back of my chair, the one that wasn't mine, and looked at me the way you look at a person whose seat you've just realized you were sitting in. "You must be the wife," she said. "Don't be upset with Adrian. My stomach's been bad, so he had me rest in here before you came. And that little times ancestor times thing, it's just what we've called each other since we were kids." The watch on her wrist was a man's watch. My husband's watch. The one I had given him for our first anniversary, engraved on the back. Before we left the house that night, Adrian had turned the bedroom over looking for that watch. He'd stood in the closet with the light on, moving my folded things aside, saying he couldn't find it anywhere, and I had helped him look. I had gotten down on my knees and checked under the bed for it. I looked at his wrist now. It was bare. "He lent it to me," Sloane said, tilting her hand so the face caught the light, and then, a half-second later, covering it. "I had a client meeting and no watch. You don't mind, do you?" "I do," I said. Her smile stalled, just for a moment, before it recovered. Adrian pulled out the chair beside me. "It's a watch," he said. "I'll have her give it back tomorrow. Sit down. It was an anniversary gift. Once you give a thing away," he said, "what I do with it is mine to decide." A server came in with hot soup and heard the last of that, and the tray stopped in the air for a second before she set it down. She kept her eyes on the bowls. She arranged the spoons with more care than spoons require. Then she left, quickly, the way you leave a room where you've walked into the middle of something. Sloane ladled a bowl for me, gracious, attentive. No pepper in it, no cilantro, the things I don't eat. Adrian slid it in front of me. "Don't blow up a joke into a whole thing," he said, softer now. "Eat. I'll drive you home." He remembered how I take my soup. He remembered the pepper, the cilantro, the exact small map of what I will and won't put in my mouth. For a moment, the knot in my chest loosened, the way it always did when he remembered, because a man who remembers the pepper must be paying attention to times you, somewhere under all of it. Then Sloane lifted her phone, laughing lightly. "Adrian, the kanji you ordered me came. Roman's a picky eater. I was with him all afternoon. I'm starving." I looked down at the soup in front of me. The delivery app still glowed on Adrian's phone, the same restaurant, the same order. The soup wasn't made for me. It was the free side dish that came with times her, times meal, and he'd simply had the kitchen warm it up because he knew I'd show. Even the way he knew me had been handed to me secondhand. Here is the thing about a marriage like mine. It was not built out of one large cruelty you could point to and name. It was built out of 100 small courtesies that turned out, on inspection, to be for someone else. There's a word for the label a family agrees to pin on you without ever saying it out loud, the one whose feelings come last, whose objections are always an overreaction. I didn't have the word yet. I only had the soup, cooling, that had never been mine. Adrian stood and picked up Sloane's bag. "Your stomach's bad, don't run around. I'll walk you to the lounge." He draped his own scarf over my shoulders. "On the way past times it's cold out. Text me when you're home. Be good times," in the exact voice he used to use when he loved me without an audience. Then he turned to help her to the door. At the threshold, she lifted her wrist and shook the watch, light as anything. "Adrian, hurry. Your mother's waiting on us to taste the menu for the engagement dinner." His hand was still warm on my shoulder. His face was not. "What engagement dinner?" I said. Sloane covered her mouth. All apology. "I misspoke. Mine. Mine and the Whitmores. Your aunt said not to tell the wife yet. She didn't want you reading into it. She said times the wife, times the way you'd say, times the help. I didn't ask again." I folded his scarf off my shoulders and put it back in his hands. 3 years ago, if I forgot my scarf, he'd drive across the city to bring me one. Now, the same scarf came to me already smelling of the cedar perfume Sloane wore, and that told me more than any confession could have. "I'll get myself home," I said. He caught my arm at the door, times Naomi. "Don't make a scene. I'll take her down and come right back. 10 o'clock at the latest. There's the yogurt you like in the fridge. I'll make you the tomato pasta, all right?" And every single sentence landed on the softest, most undefended place in me, because he knew exactly where those places were. He had 4 years of maps. 10 o'clock, I said. "I'll wait." I went home. I cut the tomatoes. At 9:50, he texted, "Put the water on, 10 minutes out." At 10:30, the door finally read his fingerprint. He came in smelling of cold air and set a paper bag on the table, a bakery I'd mentioned once, months ago. He'd remembered. Then I opened the bag. Lime cake. I don't eat lime. Sloane does. The receipt was still inside, her name printed on it. For Sloane, less sugar. "They bagged it wrong," he said, reaching for it. "The order says her name." He tore the receipt off and crushed it in his fist. "It's a slice of cake." Is that worth an interrogation? On the counter, taped to the cabinet, was a menu in my handwriting from a year ago. Tomato pasta. Beside it, in my own hand, light on salt. He had promised, on the phone, to make me that pasta. He'd forgotten. He had never once known that I don't like sweet things. He only knew that every time he brought a cake home, I ate it anyway. I looked at the loose brick of that evening, the watch, the soup, the scarf, the cake, and I understood that none of the individual pieces would ever hold up as proof. That is the particular loneliness of it. There is no bruise to show anyone. You sit at a full table, married, surrounded, and you are the only person there who can feel the cold. 4 years of marriage? 41 circles on the kitchen calendar, one for every work trip, each a city he never asked the name of. Geneva. Vienna. A room with a flag I'm not allowed to describe, and a headset that cost more than the car we drove. 41 times I had said only a work trip because that was the arrangement, and 41 times he had said, "Don't bore me with your little company's errands," and I had let the word times, little times, stand. I want to stop here for a second, because if you have ever been the reasonable one in your own house, you already know the trick of it. You learn to shrink the thing that happened until it fits inside a size the room will accept. You call it a misunderstanding. You call it his stress, her illness, the family's way. You get so good at simultaneous interpretation between what is happening and what everyone insists is happening that you forget you're the only one doing the translating and that no one is paying you for it and that you have been on the clock for 4 straight years. If you know that particular exhaustion, the running total you keep that no one else can see, then you already know what I hadn't admitted yet. I'll tell it in order anyway. His mother, Diane, came by the apartment the night of the lime cake, carrying a thermos as though she'd been invited. Her eyes went to the untouched tomatoes on the board. "Adrian's working himself to the bone, and you're sitting here waiting to be waited on," she said. "Sloane feels sick, and she still stood in for him at the table all afternoon. This is hangover soup she made him. Next month, the girl gets engaged. Stop making her worry about you. You'll have the Whitmores thinking something's wrong." There was a silver pin on the collar of Diane's coat. A small leaf, worked in silver. She'd taken it out of my jewelry box a month earlier times for a family event. I'll bring it back times and never had. I'd given that pin to Adrian on our wedding anniversary. On the back of it, in letters too small to read across a room, was engraved, "A leaf that leaves the branch can still reach where it wants to go." "That's my pin," I said. "It's a trinket," Diane said, unbothered, taking off her coat. Sloane's fitting her dress, and she was short an accessory. Family doesn't keep score over a trinket. You didn't ask me. People who are family don't itemize, she said. Sloane and Adrian grew up together. If that girl hadn't gone abroad, you'd never have married into this house at all. She said it the way you'd state the weather. It was not the cruelty that landed. It was how comfortable she was saying it, how many times she must have thought it, at how many dinners before it came out this smooth. The pattern was not one shock. It was accumulation, which is harder to point at and much harder to survive. It was Diane's thermos and my tomatoes going brown on the board. It was a group text about the engagement dinner that I later learned I had been deliberately left off of 26 people planning a party in my own husband's family, and my name simply not among them, and no one noticing the gap because the gap was the point. It was the Sunday I drove 90 minutes to Diane's house with a dish I'd cooked from 6 that morning and watched her set it at the far end of the table, untouched, and serve everyone from Sloane's store-bought one first. And it was my own birthday, in March, which fell 3 days after I got back from a posting I couldn't name. I came home to an apartment with no cake and no note, and Adrian on the phone in the kitchen, arranging a surprise dinner for Sloane, whose birthday was the following week. He had booked the restaurant I'd mentioned wanting to try. He had remembered the restaurant. He had simply attached it to the wrong woman. When I said, lightly, that it was strange to plan a party for someone else's birthday and forget your wife's, he looked at me with real confusion, the way you'd look at a chair that had objected to being sat on, and said, "Your birthday's not a big thing to you. You always say that." I did always say that. I said it because the year I stopped saying it was the year I would have to notice that no one argued. That is how the pattern works. It hands you the pen and asks you to sign for your own smallness, and it does it so gently that refusing feels like the rude thing. And it was the fitting, the following week, where it stopped being small. I had chosen a deep navy dress for the reception, chosen it carefully, because I know what a room like that reads and how it reads it. Diane took it out of my hands and gave it to Sloane and handed me a gray one off the old rack. "You track orders in an office all day," she said. "One dress is the same as another on you." Sloane has to stand beside Adrian and greet guests. She can't be underdressed. "I'm Adrian's wife," I said. "The seat beside him at the head table is mine." Sloane pressed a hand to her stomach and looked at the floor. "Aunt Diane, it's fine. I don't want to take anything from her." She said it softly, so that I would be the one who looked hard for holding my ground against a sick girl being gracious. She was very good. I'll give her that across the whole length of this story. She was very, very good. And I was the only one in the family who could see the seams. And here is what the body does when the mind is still being reasonable. My voice was level. My hands were steady in my lap. But that night, in the dark, my hand was on my phone before it buzzed. It always was, by then. The body learns the ring before the sound arrives. And I lay awake in what I would much later learn to call survival mode, doing the arithmetic of a marriage the way you'd check a ledger you already know won't balance. I had stopped sleeping through the night somewhere in year 3. I had a way of waking at 3 a.m. and lying perfectly still so as not to wake him, running the day back to find the moment I could have said the thing better, been easier, cost less. I'll stop and say one thing to you directly, because if you are listening to this in the dark half asleep, I think you might be doing the same math I was. You are not keeping that ledger because you are bitter. You are keeping it because some part of you has been gathering evidence for years that you are allowed to leave and has not yet let you read the file. I hadn't read mine yet either, but I'd started. The unexpected witness in my life was not a person who rescued me. It was a woman named Ellen Chen. She runs the interpreting division where I work, and 4 years ago she came to my wedding as an elder, not a boss. Adrian didn't know her title. His father introduced her only as someone who does translation work, and Adrian smiled and said, in front of her, that I dabbled in a few languages too, that if I ever lost the office job, I could always help out pouring drinks and greeting his clients. The table laughed. I watched a woman who is interpreted for heads of state be told, at my wedding, that her life's discipline was a party trick, and I watched her decide not to embarrass my new husband on his wedding day. She looked at me across the table, one plain question in her eyes. Do you want me to correct him? I gave a small shake of the head. She let it go. She has carried the answer to that question for 4 years and never once used it because it was mine to spend. I didn't tell her what was happening at home. You don't, when you're the reasonable one. But the week of the fitting, without telling anyone, I made a call I had never imagined making. I booked a consultation, just to understand what leaving would cost. I told myself I only wanted the number. The night before the reception, Adrian pulled a garment bag out of the fitting room closet and put it in my hands. Inside was a white dress in my exact size, the cuffs taken in the way I always have them taken in, the length right, the collar cut for my shoulders. A dress I'd mentioned wanting once, months ago, while he read email and I assumed he wasn't listening. I had it made for you, he said. Don't fight her for the Navy one. Tomorrow my father is introducing you to people who matter. You'll be standing next to me. He fixed my collar. His hand came to rest on my shoulder, and his thumb moved once across the back of my ear, and I nearly believed the whole architecture of him again on the strength of that one gesture. That is the thing no one who grew up easily loved will ever quite understand about a house like mine, that the cruelty and the tenderness come from the same hand, and the tenderness is real, and that is precisely what keeps you. If he had only ever been cold, I'd have left in the first year. It was the pepper he remembered, the dress in my size, the thumb across my ear that kept me translating for 4. Where's the pin? I asked. And the watch? After the reception, he said. Sloane and the Whitmores are still smoothing things over. She can't have anything go wrong this week. At 9:50 that night, his mother's number lit his phone, and then Sloane's, crying, saying the Whitmore son wanted to call off the engagement. He'd seen the watch. He thought she and Adrian were tangled up together. Could Adrian please come explain? Adrian picked up his coat. I stood in front of the door. You promised me. Tomorrow. Standing next to you. If her engagement falls apart tonight, he said, will that make you happy? Tell her to take the watch off. That explains it. He stepped around me and opened the door. The watch stays on her for now. At the reception tomorrow, I'll say publicly that I lent it to her. That settles it. Behind him, from the phone, I heard Sloane say, small and sweet, Adrian. His steps paused. Then he pressed the elevator button and did not turn around. That was the night I stopped waiting up. I put the tomatoes in the trash. I got into bed, and for the first time in 4 years, the quiet in the apartment didn't feel like something I had to fix. It felt like the first quiet I had ever been allowed to keep. On the nightstand was my work calendar, the one he'd never opened. 41 circles. Beside each one, in my own small hand, the word Times Work. He had always believed I was somewhere in a warehouse, chasing a shipment. I closed the cover. Tucked in the back was the appointment card from the consultation. The date on it was 3 days before the reception. I had already made up my mind. I just hadn't told him yet. The reception was for Adrian's father's birthday, and it had a purpose folded inside the cake. A delegation was coming, foreign guests, a deal the Hales had spent a year on. The whole point of putting me in the white dress and beside Adrian was to have me photograph well next to power. I understood that. I went anyway, because I had one thing left to do in that room, and it was not the thing any of them expected. The hall was the kind of place that is designed to make you feel either chosen or small, depending on where they seat you. I had spent my career in rooms exactly like it, standing a step behind people whose words I carried, and I knew every current in it before I'd taken off my coat. I knew which handshake meant nothing and which meant a contract. I knew the delegation's principal by reputation before he ever looked my way. The Hales did not know that I knew any of it. They had decided long ago what I was, and people rarely check that kind of decision once they've made it. The declaration came early, and it came from Diane. The photographer was arranging the family for the portrait, and Diane put her hand flat against my forearm and moved me out of the frame the way you move a chair. Sloan represents the Whitmores tonight. She stands here. It's appropriate, she said. Then, to me, in a voice pitched for the people nearby to hear and pretend not to, Naomi, be a dear and hold everyone's coats. Does she really need to take fashion notes from a girl who tracks orders in an office? There it was, the sentence under all the other sentences, the one I had spent 4 years proving wrong by being useful. You are not one of us. You are the help. You were never chosen. You were let in. My husband's father found something to look at on his cufflink. 2 of Adrian's aunts reached for the same untouched glass at the exact same moment so they'd have somewhere to put their eyes. An uncle laughed a half-second too long at a joke no one had made to fill the hole where a decent person would have spoken. Nobody spoke. In a family, the silence of the people who agree with you but would never say so out loud is its own kind of vote, and I had lost that vote at that table many times before. I was used to the counting. I did not react. I have been trained not to react. It is half of what the booth teaches you. You learn to hold a face still while a man across a table says something that could start or end a negotiation, and to let nothing of your own cross into the record. I took a breath and let it out slow, and I felt my own pulse in my ears, and I did not say the thing yet. I took the coats. I folded them over my arm, one by one, and I counted them, because counting is what my hands do when the rest of me is holding very still. Adrian crossed the floor and lifted his own vest into my arms and said, "Lo, 1 photo. Then I'll find you." The flash went off. Sloan rose on her toes and whispered something against his ear, and his hand went to the small of her back, closing the gap where a wife should have stood. The photographer waved at me. Could the staff step out of frame? She's in the shot. She's not staff, Adrian said, coming back through the crowd, and he took the vest out of my arms and held my hand in front of all of them. She's my wife, Naomi Vance. He added a chair to the head table with his own hands. For one moment, the only moment, that whole marriage, he chose me out loud, in a room full of the people he'd spent 4 years hiding me from. And I felt the old knot loosen one more time, and I let it, because I am human, and it had been a very long 4 years. Then the delegation's principal rose to speak, and there was no prepared text, and the hired interpreter didn't have the technical vocabulary, and Adrian's father waved his hand for someone to fix it. Sloan took the microphone before I could move. She rendered the Russian into English for the room. And in the middle of it, she took the line times, "We are prepared to suspend the partnership pending review times," and delivered it, smiling, as times we are delighted to move the partnership forward, the opposite of what the man had said. In a room of people signing on the strength of her words, I pressed the backup microphone. That's not what he said. The room turned. Sloane's face went the color of the tablecloth. "Naomi, I know you've picked up a little Russian," she said gently, for the audience, "but a formal setting isn't the place to guess." He said times suspend, pending review. She said, "Times move forward. That is not a small slip." I said it the way you'd read a weather report. In 8 years of simultaneous interpretation, I have learned that the calmer your voice, the harder the correct word lands. They did not thank me. They closed ranks. Diane pressed a pen into my hand and a printed page onto the table, a statement admitting that I, an unqualified spouse, had interfered with the interpreting and caused any errors, that none of it touched Sloan. "You're a shipping clerk," Diane said. "Worst case, you find another job. Sloan is marrying into the Whitmores. Her name can't have a mark on it." And Adrian, the man who had added my chair with his own hands 20 minutes before, looked away from me and said, "Sign it. The company will make it right. Tomorrow I'll go with you to hand in your notice. You'll stay home. I'll take care of you. I'll take care of you." The sweetest sentence he owned, produced at the exact moment he needed me to take the fall for someone else. I looked at the tie at his collar. I had knotted it that morning, standing behind him at the mirror, the way I had 1,000 mornings, and he had let me, and then he had come here and asked me to sign my name to a lie, so that another woman's afternoon would stay clean. I did not sign it. I set the pen down on the page, parallel to the edge, the way you set down a tool you are finished with. The door opened on an even step, and Ellen Chen walked in, and behind her the delegation's principal and 2 staff, and the temperature of the room changed the way it does when the actual authority arrives and everyone else's borrowed authority evaporates. "Who is asking Naomi Vance to resign?" she said. She read the page in my hand. She looked at the signature line. She did not raise her voice, and that was worse for them than if she had. "You are asking a senior conference interpreter for the Department of State to take the blame for a mistranslation committed by an unqualified person at an official function." She set her credentials on the table. "This reception falls under federal jurisdiction. Every word spoken here tonight is recorded and archived as a sealed government record." Naomi withheld the specifics of her post because her clearance requires it. "That is not a lie she told you. That is the law, protecting a classified security clearance." I watched it move across Adrian's face, the 8 years, the 4 years, the 41 cities he never asked the name of, all arriving at once, far too late to be of any use to either of us. He looked at me the way you look at a photograph of a person you thought you knew, taken in a place you've never been. I had been that place the whole time. He had simply never asked to see the pictures. I want to be precise about the weapon in this story, because it was not the recording and it was not Ellen Chen. Those only opened the door. The weapon was one plain sentence I had been swallowing for 4 years, and I finally set it down on that table in a normal voice, the way you'd mentioned the weather. I said, "The problem was never that you didn't know what I did for a living. The problem is that for 4 years, you never once asked, and a man who never asks has already decided the answer doesn't matter." I said it slowly. I said it without heat. I did not cry, and I did not raise my voice, and I think the not crying frightened him more than tears would have, because tears he knew how to manage. The room could not hold that sentence and go on pretending at the same time. For a moment, nobody moved. The delegation's principal, who had understood every word of the Russian and most of the English, looked at Adrian with the particular pity powerful men reserve for other men who have just been shown to have thrown away something valuable through carelessness. One of the aunts set her glass down too hard. Diane opened her mouth and, for the first time in the 4 years I had known her, found nothing in it, no correction, no smoothing, no times people who are family don't itemize. The machine had run out of the one thing it needed, which was a room full of people agreeing not to notice. Adrian said my name? Just my name, the way he used to say it in the dark when there was no audience to perform reasonableness for. 4 years too late, in the one room where it could do nothing. I had waited so long to hear him say it like that, in front of other people. I had rehearsed in the 3 a.m. dark exactly how much it would mean. It turned out to mean the same as everything else he had ever handed me at the moment it stopped being useful to keep. I looked at him and felt the knot in my chest that had loosened and tightened 1,000 times over 4 years finally, quietly, come undone, not with a snap, just the way a held breath leaves you when you finally decide you're allowed to exhale. That should have been the end. It wasn't, because Sloan had built a second move, and it surfaced 2 days later as a formal complaint filed against me at my own agency, with attachments, clips of my voice correcting the translation, a clip of the delegate calling me by my professional name, all trimmed and resequenced into a story where I had abused my position to sabotage the Hales and forced Adrian to divorce me. Doctored audio, cut by a person who understood exactly which 3 seconds to keep and which hour to throw away. She had miscalculated one thing. She had forgotten what official function means. The entire event existed as a complete, sealed government record, the full official transcript and audio, time-stamped, that the protocol office archives by law and does not lose and does not edit. When the investigators laid her doctored audio beside the unbroken original, her own recording became the thing who hanged her. The full record showed Sloan speaking fluent Russian before the speeches even began, coaching the delegate in Russian to wait for me to slip so she could pin it on me. It showed the little tyrant line at the restaurant had been staged at her request to make me doubt my husband. Splicing and submitting that classified audio to a federal agency was, the letter I later received noted in flat font, both a breach of NDA and something the investigators referred to without drama as corporate sabotage, and because she'd wired the edited files and a payment to the man who cut them across state lines to file the false report, it carried the shadow of federal wire fraud. The false statement they'd tried to make me sign had a plainer name too. Once a federal function was involved, perjury. The thing about building a trap out of a recording is that a recording does not take sides. It keeps everything, including the parts you hoped it wouldn't. She had spent so long being the most careful person in every room that she'd forgotten the one room where careful doesn't help you, the one where the truth was already written down before you walked in. The second voice of truth in that room was not a lawyer and not a judge. It was a protocol intern named Mia, 22, holding a clipboard, who had been standing by the door through all of it. When Diane said, once more, for the record, "She's just Adrian's wife. She's overwrought," Mia looked up, confused, and said the most obvious thing in the world. The thing every powerful adult in that family had spent an evening carefully not saying, but she's the lead interpreter for the delegation. Isn't she? Plain words. A question, not a speech. It landed because of everything that came before it, and because it came from the one person in the room with nothing to gain by saying it. Diane didn't answer her. She looked at the intern the way you look at a draft coming under a door, something small and cold that has gotten into a room it has no business in. And in that look, I finally saw the whole machine of the family laid open, not a misunderstanding, not a hard woman having a hard week, but a system that had run for decades on the simple fuel of someone agreeing to be less. Sloan had grown up inside that machine and learned to feed it. I had married into it and been fed to it. The intern, who had grown up somewhere else, could not understand why a room full of powerful people would work so hard to unsee a fact sitting in plain view. That was the whole answer. They needed the fact gone more than they needed it true. I had spent 4 years being the fact they needed gone. I picked up my coat off the back of the chair. I did not take a plate for the road. Here is how it came apart for them, which is to say, here is how they came apart for themselves. Sloan lost the brand consultant post the Hales had dangled in front of her, because a firm whose whole product is reputation cannot keep a consultant who fabricated a federal complaint. She answered for the doctored audio through the proper channels, and the answering was long and expensive and public in the specific circle where she had spent her life wanting to be seen. The Whitmores called off the engagement for real this time, not over a watch, but over the transcript, which spared no one and flattered nothing. Roman's firm cut ties with the Hales the same week, and he issued the kind of apology that ends a man's usefulness in an industry as small as his. Adrian's father stepped back from running the company while the review ran its course, and the review ran a long time. None of them were destroyed. I want to be honest about that, because a story that ends with everyone in ruins is a fairy tale, and this is not one. They kept their houses. They kept their money. What they lost was the thing they had been using me to hold up: the smooth surface, the good name, the version of the family where everyone was reasonable, and the only difficult person was the wife who wouldn't sit down. The thing about a family that needs someone to look down on is that you only see how much they needed it on the day you stop volunteering. When I stopped, the whole arrangement tilted, and they spent a season scrambling to find what had been holding the floor level. It had been me. It had been me the entire time. I filed for divorce. There is a 30-day reflection period built into it, and Adrian spent all 30 at the edges of my life. He resigned his post at Hale Global not for me, whatever he said. The review meant he couldn't run point on foreign accounts while it was open. He sold the apartment and split it down the middle under community property, not as a settlement, because he knew I wouldn't take a settlement. He learned, somewhere in there, that I don't like sweet things. He mentioned it to me once, quietly, at the registry office, as though it were a wound. I bought you cake for 4 years and you ate every slice and I never knew. Now you know, I said. The last thing he tried to give me was the pin. He'd had the original silversmith repair it. There was a new bead of solder at the stem where he'd crushed it in his fist the night of the reception. A small leaf, in silver, mended at the join. You told me once what the engraving meant, he said. A leaf that leaves the branch can still reach where it wants to go. I finally remembered one. Here is the line I need to say clearly, because it is the difference between a story and a fairy tale. I forgave him. I did. Somewhere in those 30 days, I stopped hating him and stopped hoping he'd become the man I'd kept translating him into, and the two turned out to be the same act. But forgiving him was never the same as going back. I could understand exactly how he was built, a man raised to believe the people around him were furniture, arranged for his comfort, and feel something almost like compassion, and still close the door. Understanding a person and staying with a person are different rooms, and I had spent 4 years mistaking the wall between them for a hallway. I didn't take the pin. You gave it to me, he said. And I already gave it back once, I said. Whether you mend it now is your business, not mine. The leaf already left the branch. It got where it was going. The morning after the divorce was final, I went back to the booth. If you have never sat inside simultaneous interpretation, I'll tell you what it is. A voice comes into your ears in one language and leaves your mouth in another with almost no gap. And to do it, you have to empty yourself out completely. No opinion, no fear, no self, and become a clean channel for someone else's meaning. I had been doing a version of that at home for 4 years, emptying myself out so his meaning could pass through unobstructed, carrying his version of me across every room without leaving a fingerprint of my own on it. The difference is that in the booth, at the end of the session, you get to take the headset off and be a person again. At home, I had forgotten there was a headset. I had forgotten I was allowed to take it off. I don't do that at home anymore because I don't have that home anymore. And the relief of that is a thing I'm still, some mornings, surprised by the way you're surprised by quiet after living a long time next to a road. I took a different track at work. I turned down the promotion that would have moved me into management and asked instead to split my time between the booth and training the next crop of young interpreters. A girl on my first cohort, nervous, couldn't hold her pen steady when the headset went live. I reached over and fixed her mic. "Don't be afraid," I told her. "Just listen to the whole sentence first. Never translate half of one." She nodded like I'd handed her something heavy. Maybe I had. It was the only advice that had ever mattered, in the booth and out of it. Hear the whole thing before you decide what it means. I had married a man on half a sentence. I had stayed with him on half of one over and over for 4 years. Ellen Chen took me to lunch the week the review closed. She didn't say anything about the marriage. She had never once, in 4 years, said times I told you so, mostly because she had never told me so. She had only held the answer to that one question and waited for me to want it. What she said, over the check, was this: the best interpreters are the ones who spent a long time being underestimated. You learn to hear everything in a room while people forget you're in it. Then she said, "You don't have to keep being that at home." It was the closest thing to advice she ever gave me, and she gave it after I had already left, which is the only time that kind of advice is any use. I keep the calendar still. New circles now, new cities, and no one in my life who needs me to pretend they're small. When I fly out, someone knows the name of the place I'm going and asks and listens to the whole answer before deciding what it means. It is such a small thing to want. It took me 33 years to learn I was allowed to want it out loud, and one quiet reckoning at a birthday dinner to say it. The white dress is still in a bag in the back of a closet I no longer share. I didn't return it. Some nights I think I keep it because it was the one thing he made for me and not for the photograph. Most nights I know I keep it because it fit cuffs taken in exactly the way I always have them taken in, and a thing that fits you is worth keeping even after you've walked out of the room it was made for. Someone told me once that you can be surrounded and still be the only one in the room who feels the cold. It took me 4 years and one very quiet divorce to believe that wasn't a flaw in me. It was information. So let me ask you the hard one, and I want the real answer, not the strong-sounding one. If the only way to be seen was to stop translating, to stop shrinking the thing that happened until it fit the size the room would accept, to let the silence sit there ugly and unexplained, and to walk out of the frame instead of holding everyone's coats, could you do it? Even if it cost you the marriage, the family, the version of the story where you were finally one day chosen? Tell me the truth in the comments. Not the answer. That sounds brave. The real one. And one thing before you go. If this felt less like a story and more like a memory, if you know the exact weight of being the reasonable one, the one who keeps the running total no one else can see, I'm sorry. Not because you were too sensitive, but because you were right the whole time and no one told you. You are not the difficult one. You were a person asking to be seen in a house that had already decided you were furniture, and that was never your failure to carry. Being right is not the same as being loud. You can leave quietly and still be leaving for good. Subscribe, and I'll keep telling the stories the people who underestimated you would rather you never said out loud.